The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne. Maya Carter held it in her trembling hands as she stood in the lobby of the Mandarin Oriental, surrounded by marble columns and the soft murmur of the wealthy elite. Inside that envelope was a cashier's check for $500,000, made out in her name. All she had to do was sign the contract attached to it, walk back into the life she'd left behind 3 years ago, and pretend that love could be bought like everything else in Marcus Webb's world. She looked up at him, standing there in his $15,000 suit, his jaw tight with the kind of tension that came from a man who'd never been told no, and she said the 3 words that would haunt him forever: "You still don't get it. But let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand how a woman who grew up sharing a bedroom with 2 sisters in a cramped apartment in Queens ended up rejecting enough money to change her life, and how a man who could buy small countries ended up on his knees in a hotel lobby, destroyed by the only thing his money couldn't purchase." Maya Carter was 23 when she first met Marcus Webb at a charity gala in Manhattan. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her roommate, Jen, worked for the catering company and had convinced Maya to fill in for a sick colleague, promising her $200 cash and free food. Maya had been working 3 jobs at the time, trying to pay off her student loans from Columbia while working as a junior editor at a struggling publishing house. She'd arrived at the Cipriani in her only good dress, a simple black number from H&M that she'd worn to every important event for the past 2 years, and immediately felt out of place among women dripping in diamonds and men whose watches cost more than her annual salary. She was carrying a tray of champagne through the crowd when she literally collided with him. The glasses went everywhere, expensive champagne cascading down the front of his tuxedo like a carbonated waterfall. Maya froze, her face burning with humiliation, already calculating how many paychecks it would take to replace a custom tuxedo. But Marcus Webb just laughed. It wasn't the polite laugh of someone trying to make her feel better. It was genuine, the kind of laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him seem almost human despite the aura of power that surrounded him like cologne. "I'm so sorry," Maya stammered, grabbing napkins from a nearby table and making everything worse by trying to pat him dry. "I'll pay for the cleaning aisle." "It's just a suit," he said, catching her wrist gently. "I have 40 more at home." She looked up at him, then really looked at him and felt something shift in her chest. He was handsome in that specific way that rich men often are, well-groomed and symmetrical, but there was something else in his eyes. A loneliness maybe. A hunger for something real in a room full of artificial smiles. 40 suits?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "That seems excessive." He grinned. "You should see my shoe collection." That was how it started. Not with roses and romance, but with champagne-stained fabric and the kind of instant connection that happens so rarely it feels like fate. Marcus abandoned the gala, abandoned whatever business deal he was supposed to be making, and they spent the next 4 hours talking on the steps outside while Maya should have been working. He told her about growing up with a father who measured love in stock portfolios and board positions. She told him about her dreams of becoming a real writer, not just fixing other people's manuscripts for minimum wage. When he asked for her number, she almost didn't give it to him. She knew that men like Marcus Webb didn't date women like her. They had flings with them, adventures, walks on the wild side before returning to their own tax bracket. But he called the next day. And the day after that. Within a month they were inseparable. Marcus showed her a world she'd only read about in the books she edited. Private jets to Paris for lunch, front row seats at Fashion Week, hotel suites bigger than her entire apartment. But what surprised Maya most wasn't the luxury. It was how badly Marcus wanted to escape from it. He was happiest in her tiny studio apartment, eating takeout Thai food on her second-hand couch, watching her work on her novel late into the night. He told her she made him feel real, that everyone else in his life wanted something from him, but she just wanted him. For 18 months it was perfect. Or it seemed perfect. Maya quit 2 of her 3 jobs. Not because Marcus asked her to, but because she finally had time to breathe, to write, to be something other than exhausted. She finished her novel. Marcus read every word, staying up all night with the manuscript, calling her at 3 in the morning to tell her it was brilliant. He wanted to introduce her to everyone he knew in publishing, to use his connections to make her dreams come true. That's when she started to see the cracks. Marcus didn't know how to love something without trying to own it. Every gesture of generosity came with invisible strings. When her book got rejected by the first agent she queried, Marcus tried to buy a publishing house to guarantee her a deal. When she expressed interest in taking a writing class, he offered to hire the professor to give her private lessons. He couldn't understand why she said no, why she pulled away every time he tried to solve her problems with his wealth. They started fighting. Small arguments at first, then bigger ones, until they were screaming at each other across his penthouse about things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with respect. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Maya had just gotten her first acceptance from a literary agent, achieved entirely on her own merit through months of querying and rejection. She was ecstatic, calling Marcus immediately to share the news. He congratulated her, then casually mentioned that he'd had his assistant reach out to the agent's boss to put in a good word. Maya felt something die inside her chest. She couldn't prove that his interference had influenced the decision, but she could never be certain it hadn't. He'd stolen her achievement by trying to guarantee it. She moved out that night. Marcus didn't understand. He followed her to her friend's apartment, to her new job at a different publishing house, sending flowers and gifts and increasingly desperate messages. He offered her money to come back. First 10,000, then 50, then 100. Each offer felt like a fresh wound, proof that he still didn't understand why she'd left. You couldn't buy back trust. You couldn't purchase respect or genuine partnership. But Marcus had spent his entire life in a world where everything had a price, and he couldn't conceive of something that didn't. Maya blocked his number, changed her email, moved to Brooklyn and threw herself into her writing and her work. Over the next 3 years she built a life that was entirely her own. Her novel got published to modest success. She got promoted to senior editor. She dated other people, though none of them ever quite measured up to those early days with Marcus before everything got complicated. She didn't follow his life in the tabloids, didn't check his social media, didn't let herself wonder if he'd moved on. She was healing, growing, becoming the person she was always meant to be. Meanwhile, Marcus was unraveling. His friends noticed it first. He'd always been intense, driven, but now there was a manic quality to his work. He threw himself into deals with reckless aggression, making enemies where he used to make allies. He dated a string of models and actresses, relationships that lasted weeks before imploding. His business partner, David Chin, cornered him one day in his office and asked him point-blank what was wrong. Marcus couldn't articulate it. How do you explain to someone that you'd had something real and destroyed it by trying too hard to keep it? That you'd learned the difference between value and worth too late? He tried to move on. God knows he tried. But every woman he met felt like a pale imitation of Maya. They laughed at his jokes because he was rich. They agreed with his opinions because they wanted something from him. None of them challenged him, frustrated him, made him want to be better the way she had. He started having his assistant compile reports on her life, just to know she was okay. He learned about her book, her promotion, her new apartment. He sent anonymous gifts on her birthday, books he thought she'd like from obscure authors, donations to her favorite charities in her name. He knew it was unhealthy, possibly creepy, but he couldn't stop. The idea came to him one sleepless night, 3 years and 2 months after she'd walked out of his life. He was drunk on whiskey that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent, staring at a photo of them from when they'd been happy. What if he could prove to her that he'd changed? What if he could make an offer so grand, so undeniable, that she'd have to at least hear him out? He called his lawyer at 2 a.m. and started drafting a contract. The offer was simple, or as simple as something so insane could be: $500,000 for 6 months of her time. No strings attached beyond spending time with him. She could keep the money regardless of the outcome. If at the end of 6 months she still wanted nothing to do with him, she'd walk away $500,000 richer and he'd never contact her again. But if they could recapture what they'd had, if he could prove he understood now what he'd failed to understand before, maybe they could start over. His lawyer told him he was crazy. David told him he was having a breakdown. His therapist, a woman charging $500 an hour to tell him things he didn't want to hear, suggested this was an unhealthy attempt to control a situation where he had no control. But Marcus didn't care. He had the contract drawn up, had the check prepared, and used every resource at his disposal to figure out where Maya would be on a Thursday afternoon. That's how he ended up at the Mandarin Oriental, where Maya was meeting with a potential author for her publishing house. He'd reserved the presidential suite upstairs, had his assistant coordinate the timing so he'd accidentally run into her in the lobby. When Maya saw him, her face went through a series of emotions so quickly it was like watching a film reel: surprise, anger, pain, exhaustion, and finally, a carefully constructed neutrality that hurt worse than any of the others. "Marcus," she said, her voice flat. "This isn't a coincidence, is it?" "I need to talk to you," he said. "Please. Just 5 minutes." She should have walked away. Every instinct she developed over 3 years of healing told her to turn around and leave. But there was something in his face, a desperation that made him look almost vulnerable, that made her pause. "5 minutes," she said. "The clock's already running." He led her to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the afternoon crowd. That's when he presented the envelope. Maya stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" "A proposition," Marcus said, and he explained his offer. 6 months, $500,000, a chance to prove he'd changed. As he spoke, Maya felt a familiar anger building in her chest. 3 years. 3 years of therapy and growth and building a life without him, and he thought he could just buy his way back into her world? She opened the envelope with shaking hands. The check was real. The contract was professionally drafted, every contingency covered. It was the most Marcus thing she'd ever seen, trying to negotiate love like it was a corporate merger. She read through it carefully, and with each paragraph her resolve strengthened. "Marcus," she said finally, looking up at him, "do you know what the saddest part of this is?" "What?" he asked, and there was hope in his voice, like maybe she was about to say yes. "You're doing exactly what you did before. You're trying to solve an emotional problem with money. You think if the offer is big enough, generous enough, I'll overlook the fundamental issue." She held up the contract. "This isn't romance. It's not even respect. It's you trying to buy certainty in a situation where there shouldn't be any." "That's not," Marcus started, but she cut him off. "If you'd really changed, you would have sent me a letter. Or shown up with nothing but an apology and a hope that I might want to get coffee. You would have respected my silence as an answer. Instead, you've been having me followed, sending anonymous gifts, and now this." She gestured at the envelope. "This is a man who still thinks everything has a price tag." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "Maya, please. I love you. I've loved you every day for 3 years. I don't know how else to." "That's the problem," she said, and her voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "You love me, but you don't understand me. You never did. And all the money in the world can't bridge that gap." She placed the envelope on the table between them, the check and contract still inside, unopened and unwanted. Marcus stared at it like it was a grenade. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and his voice broke. "Tell me what you want and I'll do it." Maya smiled sadly. "I want you to hear what I'm saying. Not what you wish I was saying, but the actual words. I don't want your money, Marcus. I never did. I wanted a partner who saw me as an equal, who supported my dreams without trying to control them, who understood that love isn't about grand gestures and contracts. It's about trust and respect and being willing to let someone be their own person, even when it scares you." "I can be that," Marcus said desperately. "I can change. I have changed." "Maybe you have," Maya said. "I hope you have, for your sake. But that doesn't mean you get me back. That's not how this works. You don't get to press a reset button because you've done the work. Sometimes the damage is permanent, Marcus. Sometimes growing means accepting that some doors close forever." She stood up, straightening her dress with hands that had stopped shaking. Marcus remained seated, staring at the envelope full of money that suddenly felt worthless. "I don't hate you," Maya said. "I want you to know that. I hope you find someone who fits into your world better than I did. Someone who wants the things you want to give. But that person isn't me. It was never going to be me." "You still don't get it," Maya said, and those words echoed through the lobby, through Marcus's mind, through the hollow space where his heart used to be. He watched her walk away, her posture straight, her steps confident. She didn't look back. Not once. The envelope sat on the table, a monument to his failure to understand the most basic truth. Some things can't be bought and some people can't be owned, and the sooner you learn that, the less damage you do to both them and yourself. Marcus sat there for a long time after she left, until hotel security started to look at him with concern. He picked up the envelope finally, feeling the weight of all that meaningless money. His phone buzzed with emails about meetings and deals, the constant noise of a life built on acquisition and control. For the first time he wondered if he'd been building the wrong thing all along. 3 months later, Maya heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus had taken a leave of absence from his company. He'd gone to somewhere remote, Montana or Wyoming, somewhere without cell service or stock tickers or the constant validation of his bank account. She didn't reach out. It wasn't her place to anymore. But she hoped he found what he was looking for, whatever that was. As for the check, it was never cashed. Marcus had it framed and hung it in his home office as a reminder. Not of the woman he'd lost, though he'd never forget her, but of the man he'd been and the man he needed to become. $500,000 for the most important lesson of his life. You can't negotiate love, you can't contract intimacy, and the only thing worth more than money is knowing when to let go. Maya continued her life, writing her second novel, falling in love eventually with a high school teacher named Alex who made her laugh and never once tried to solve her problems unless she asked. She saw Marcus's picture in the business section occasionally and felt nothing but a distant wish for his happiness. They both moved on finally the way they needed to. Sometimes the most devastating response isn't anger or tears. Sometimes it's clarity. Sometimes it's a woman standing in a hotel lobby, rejecting $500,000 and saying with quiet certainty, "You still don't get it." Because those 4 words contained everything Marcus had spent 3 years and countless dollars failing to understand. Love isn't a transaction. Trust isn't for sale. And some mistakes, no matter how wealthy you are, can't be undone with a check. The story of Marcus Webb and Maya Carter became something of an urban legend in certain circles. The billionaire who offered $500,000 to win back his ex. The woman who said no without hesitation. People debated what they would have done, whether she was a fool or a hero, whether he was romantic or delusional. But those people missed the point entirely. It was never about the money. It was about 2 people who loved each other but spoke different languages, who wanted to be together but couldn't bridge the gap between their worlds. It was about learning that happy endings don't always look like reconciliation, and sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. But the story doesn't end there, because rejection has consequences that ripple far beyond a single moment in a hotel lobby. 2 weeks after Maya walked away from $500,000, Marcus's world began to collapse in ways money couldn't fix. His company's board called an emergency meeting. His erratic behavior over the past 3 years, the reckless deals, the distracted leadership, it had all come to a head. David Chin, his oldest friend and business partner, delivered the news himself. Marcus was being asked to step down as CEO. The vote was unanimous. "You haven't been yourself for years," David said, unable to meet his eyes. "We've tried to help you, but you're destroying everything you built. Including yourself." Marcus didn't fight it. For the first time in his life he felt too tired to fight. He signed the papers, handed over control of the empire he'd spent 15 years building, and walked out of the boardroom feeling nothing. The press had a field day. "Billionaires fall from grace," the headline screamed. "Lovesick CEO loses empire." His face was everywhere, attached to speculation and scandal. Someone had leaked the story about the $500,000 offer, and suddenly Maya was thrust into a spotlight she'd never wanted. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Her phone exploded with interview requests, book deal offers, people wanting to monetize her rejection. Her publisher loved the publicity, her novel sales tripled overnight, but Maya felt sick. This wasn't how she wanted success. Not built on the corpse of someone else's breakdown, not feeding the narrative that she was either a gold-digging manipulator or a saint too pure for this world. She was just a woman who'd said no, and now her life was being dissected by millions of strangers. Then came the night that changed everything again. Maya was working late at her apartment when her phone rang. A known number. She almost didn't answer, tired of journalists and curiosity seekers. But something made her pick up. "Maya?" The voice was female, shaky, desperate. "This is Elizabeth Webb, Marcus's mother." Maya's blood went cold. She'd met Elizabeth exactly once, at a strained dinner where Marcus's mother had made it painfully clear that Maya wasn't suitable for her son. Old money didn't mix with no money in Elizabeth Webb's world. "Mrs. Webb, I don't think." "He's in the hospital," Elizabeth cut her off, and now Maya could hear she was crying. "He collapsed. They think it was pills and alcohol. They're saying he tried to." She couldn't finish the sentence. The room spun. Maya gripped the edge of her desk, her mind racing. "Is he alive?" "Yes, but barely. He's been asking for you. Only you." "Please, I know I have no right to ask, I know how I treated you, but he's my son and he's dying and you're the only person he wants." Elizabeth's voice cracked completely. "I'm begging you." Maya should have said no. Every therapist, every friend, every self-help book would tell her this wasn't her responsibility. You can't save someone who's drowning if they're going to pull you under. But she was already grabbing her coat, already heading for the door. The hospital was a sterile nightmare of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Elizabeth met her outside Marcus's room, this woman who'd once looked at Maya like she was dirt now clutching her hands with desperate gratitude. Through the window, Maya could see him, unconscious, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped steadily, mechanically keeping him alive. "The doctors say he'd been planning it for days," Elizabeth whispered. "Left everything in order. Updated his will. Wrote letters." She pulled an envelope from her purse with shaking hands. "This one's for you." Maya took it but didn't open it. "Not yet." "Can I see him? Please." She sat beside his bed for hours, this man who'd loved her so badly it had destroyed them both. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, all that power and money stripped away to reveal just a broken human being who'd never learned how to be whole. The letter burned in her pocket. Finally, as dawn light started filtering through the blinds, she opened it. The handwriting was Marcus's, but messier than usual, written by someone who'd already made their decision. Maya, I'm not doing this to manipulate you or make you feel guilty. I need you to know that. You were right about everything. I didn't get it, not really, not until I lost everything and realized the only thing that ever mattered was already gone. I'm not strong enough for the work it takes to live in a world where you exist but aren't mine. I'm sorry for being weak. I'm sorry for every way I failed you. Please don't blame yourself. You gave me the most real thing I ever had, even if I was too broken to keep it. Live your beautiful life. Write your beautiful words. Be happy. That's all I ever really wanted for you, even when I was too selfish to admit it. Maya read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face, anger and grief and frustration all tangled together. She wanted to scream at him for putting this on her, for making his pain her burden. But she also wanted to shake him awake and tell him he was wrong, that giving up wasn't the answer, that healing was possible if he'd just do the actual work instead of trying to shortcut his way through it with grand gestures and dramatic exits. When Marcus finally opened his eyes 2 days later, disoriented and groggy, the first thing he saw was Maya sitting in the chair beside his bed. For a moment he thought he was dead, that this was whatever came after. "You're alive," she said quietly. "And you're going to stay that way. Do you understand me? Why are you here?" His voice was raspy, broken. "Because apparently I'm an idiot who can't let you self-destruct without trying to stop it one last time." She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "But I need you to understand something, Marcus. I'm here as a human being who doesn't want you to die. Not as your girlfriend. Not as your second chance. Not as your salvation. You don't get to use this as leverage for anything." "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry. God, Maya, I'm so sorry for all of it. Sorry isn't enough anymore. You need help. Real help. Not a therapist you pay to tell you what you want to hear, not a geographic change, not time. Actual, intensive psychiatric care. You need to learn how to be a whole person who doesn't measure his worth by his bank account or his ability to control outcomes." He closed his eyes, fresh tears sliding down his temples. "I don't know if I can. You don't have a choice. Because if you ever do something like this again, I won't come. Your mother won't survive it. David won't survive it. And whatever tiny part of me that still cares about the man you could have been won't survive it either." Her voice softened just slightly. "You have to live, Marcus. And you have to learn how to live for yourself, not for me, not for anyone else. Just for you." Marcus spent 60 days in a psychiatric facility upstate, a place that didn't allow phones or visitors or any of the escape hatches he usually employed. Maya didn't visit. She'd said what she needed to say, and anything more would cross a line she couldn't uncross. But she got updates from Elizabeth, who called weekly with trembling gratitude, still apologizing for how she treated Maya years ago. The media circus eventually died down. Maya gave one carefully worded statement through her publisher asking for privacy, then refused all other requests. Her book became a bestseller on its own merit, not just as gossip fuel. She started dating Alex, took trips without checking her phone, slowly rebuilt the peace Marcus's reappearance had shattered. When Marcus was released from the facility, he didn't contact her. He moved to Seattle, as far from New York as he could get while staying in the contiguous United States. He sold most of his assets, keeping only enough to live comfortably, and donated the rest to mental health charities and publishing programs for underprivileged writers. It was reported that he'd started working at a nonprofit, doing actual labor instead of writing checks. People who knew him said he seemed different, quieter, more present. A year after the hospital, Maya received a package. Inside was the framed check for $500,000, the glass now cracked. There was a note in Marcus's handwriting, steadier now. "You were right. I still didn't get it. I'm starting to understand now what that actually means. Thank you for saving my life even though you had every reason not to. I hope you're happy. I hope Alex treats you the way you deserve. And I hope someday I'll learn to be happy too on my own, without needing someone else to make me feel real. I'm working on it. Every day I'm working on it." Maya never responded. Some stories don't have neat endings, don't wrap up with reconciliation or closure. Marcus had to learn to live with the consequences of his actions, the permanent loss of something precious because he'd handled it carelessly. Maya had to learn to live with the complicated truth that you can care about someone's well-being without wanting them in your life, that empathy and boundaries can coexist. 5 years later, Maya married Alex in a small ceremony in Brooklyn. Her third novel won a major literary award. She never saw Marcus again, though she heard through the grapevine that he'd gotten remarried too, to a therapist he'd met in group counseling, and that he seemed genuinely content. She was glad for him, in the distant way you're glad when you hear that someone who hurt you has finally found peace. But peace, as it turned out, was more fragile than either of them realized. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 8 years after that day in the Mandarin Oriental. Maya was cooking dinner, her 6-year-old daughter drawing at the kitchen table, when her phone rang. Elizabeth Webb's name flashed on the screen. They'd stayed in sporadic contact over the years, the kind of distant warmth that comes from shared trauma. Maya's stomach dropped before she even answered. "He's gone," Elizabeth said, her voice hollow. "Car accident. He was driving back from a volunteer shift at a youth center and a drunk driver crossed the median. He died instantly." The wooden spoon fell from Maya's hand, clattering against the stove. Alex looked up from where he was helping their daughter, saw Maya's face and immediately crossed the room to steady her. "When?" Maya whispered. "Last night. The funeral is Saturday. I know it's a lot to ask, but I think he'd want you there. I want you there." Elizabeth's voice cracked. "You saved him once. You gave us 8 more years with him. I need to thank you properly." Maya went to the funeral, despite Alex's gentle concerns, despite her own reservations. The service was small, intimate, nothing like the massive spectacle Marcus's old life would have demanded. There were people from the nonprofit, kids he'd mentored, his wife Sarah, a composed woman with kind eyes who held herself together with visible effort. When Sarah saw Maya, she walked directly over. "You're Maya?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Sarah nodded slowly. "He talked about you sometimes. Not in the way you'd think. He said you taught him how to be honest with himself. That everything good in his life came from learning the lesson you tried to teach him." She paused, reaching into her purse. "He wanted you to have this. Made me promise years ago that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you got it." It was a letter, sealed, dated just 3 months ago. Maya's hands shook as she took it. She didn't open it until she was home, alone in her office while Alex put their daughter to bed. Marcus's handwriting had changed over the years, less aggressive, more measured. "Maya, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I need you to know some things. First, you don't owe me forgiveness. You never did. What happened between us was my fault, my inability to see you as a person instead of a prize. Second, that night in the hospital when you told me I had to learn to live for myself, you saved my life in every way that matters. The years I've had since then, the real love I found with Sarah, the kids I've helped, the peace I finally made with myself, none of that would have existed without you forcing me to face the truth. Third, and this is the hard part, I need to tell you something I never told anyone else. That night I took those pills, I'd made a discovery that shattered me." Maya's breath caught. "I'd hired another investigator to check on you. I know I was still sick, still obsessed. And he found something I'd paid him to bury immediately. Do you remember that first agent who accepted your manuscript? The one I told you I'd interfered with?" "I lied, Maya. I never contacted them. I was planning to, had my assistant draft the email, but I never sent it. Your success was entirely your own. But I was so terrified you'd leave me that I sabotaged it anyway by making you think I'd helped. I stole your confidence in yourself for no reason except my own fear. When I realized what I'd done, that I'd destroyed us over a lie, over phantom interference, I couldn't live with it. The guilt was worse than losing you." The paper trembled in Maya's hands. 8 years. 8 years she'd believed her first real success was tainted. "I'm telling you now because you deserve to know the truth, even if I'm not around to face your anger. Every word you wrote, every success you achieved, it was always yours. I was just too broken and selfish to let you believe it. I'm sorry, Maya. For all of it. But mostly for that. You were always extraordinary. I just couldn't let you know it without trying to take credit. Be happy. Love Alex. Love your daughter. Write your beautiful words. And please, please forgive yourself for whatever guilt you carried about what happened to me. You saved my life. You gave me the chance to become someone worth being. That's more than I deserved." Maya read the letter 3 times, emotions crashing over her like waves. Rage at the manipulation even in retrospect. Relief that her talent had been real all along. Grief for the man who'd been so damaged he couldn't help but damage others. And finally, strangely, gratitude. Because in the end, Marcus had given her the truth, the one thing he'd struggled his entire life to give anyone. She kept the letter. Added it to the box where she stored the photo from the Cipriani, the framed check Elizabeth had insisted she take from Marcus's effects, all the artifacts of a love that had been real but toxic, transformative but ultimately impossible. Sometimes her daughter would ask about the box, and Maya would tell her age-appropriate versions of the story. About how sometimes love isn't enough. About how you can care about someone and still need to walk away. About how the bravest thing is sometimes saying no, even when saying yes would be easier. On the 10-year anniversary of that day in the Mandarin Oriental, Maya published her 7th novel. It was dedicated to those who taught me what I didn't want so I could recognize what I did. Critics called it her masterpiece, a meditation on love, loss, power, and redemption. Only a few people knew it was about Marcus, about her, about the price they'd both paid for lessons that came too late. Alex read it first, as he always did, and held her while she cried over the ending. Their daughter, older now, asked why Mommy was sad. Maya pulled her close and said, "Because some stories are beautiful and terrible at the same time, and that's okay. That's life." The real devastation, Maya finally understood, wasn't the rejection or the suicide attempt or even Marcus's death. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was two people who genuinely loved each other but spoke different languages, wanted different things, operated from different definitions of what love meant. It was the tragedy of bad timing, of growth that came too late, of lessons learned through loss instead of through connection. Marcus had spent $500,000 trying to buy back something that was never for sale, and in doing so, proved exactly why it could never work. But he'd also eventually done the hardest thing he'd ever done. He'd let her go, actually let her go, and built a life that honored the lessons she tried to teach him. Years later, long after the box of memories had been tucked away in the attic, Maya would sometimes catch herself thinking about that moment in the lobby. The envelope, the offer, the look on Marcus's face when she said those 4 words. She'd wonder what would have happened if she'd said yes, if she'd taken the money, if she'd given him that second chance. But the wondering was academic now, distant, like contemplating an alternate universe that could never have existed. She'd made the right choice. She knew that. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because she'd stayed true to herself, and that had made every good thing in her life possible. And somewhere she liked to think Marcus had died knowing that too. That her rejection hadn't been cruelty but clarity. That sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone's self-destruction. That the woman who walked away from $500,000 had actually given him something priceless. The truth he'd spent his whole life running from. The story of the billionaire's offer became legend, retold in business schools and therapy offices, on podcasts and in think pieces about love and power and money. But only Maya knew the real ending. Only she knew about the letter, the confession, the final gift of honesty from a man who'd learned too late how to give it. She never shared those details publicly. They were hers to keep, her private understanding of a complicated man who'd loved her badly, learned slowly, and died having finally become the person he should have been all along. That, in the end, was what devastated Marcus Webb most. Not that Maya rejected his money, but that he'd wasted so many years being the wrong version of himself. And by the time he'd figured out how to be the right version, the woman who'd tried to show him was already gone, building a beautiful life he could only watch from a distance, grateful and heartbroken in equal measure. The $500,000 was never about winning her back. It was about trying to buy back time, to purchase a reset on years of mistakes. But time, like love, doesn't accept any currency. It just moves forward, indifferent and unstoppable, teaching its lessons whether you're ready for them or not.